In February 1974, Lord Louis Mountbatten, first Sea Lord, last Viceroy of India, the man who had personally arranged the circumstances that led his nephew Prince Philip to meet the future Queen Elizabeth II, sat down and wrote a letter to the heir to the British throne. Mountbatten was 73 years old. He had spent a career engineering outcomes on a global scale. He had partitioned a subcontinent. He had commanded Allied forces across Southeast Asia. He had reformed the British armed forces from the top down over the course of a decade as Chief of the Defense Staff. A domestic matchmaking project was, by comparison, a modest undertaking. But he brought the same focused intentionality to it. The letter's key passage has been quoted in nearly every major royal biography since Jonathan Dimbleby's authorised account of Charles's life appeared in 1994. I believe, in a case like yours, the man should sow his wild oats and have as many affairs as he can before settling down. But for a wife, he should choose a suitable, attractive, and sweet-charactered girl before she has met anyone else she might fall for. Charles was 25 years old. He had recently qualified as a helicopter pilot at RNAS Yeovilton and was moving between naval postings, carrying the Prince of Wales title and a schedule of public duties that left him little control over his own time. Mountbatten had been a constant presence in his life since childhood. The great-uncle who wrote him letters, dispensed advice about military service, understood the peculiar loneliness of being royal in a way that almost no one else around Charles could. Charles would later describe him as his honorary grandfather. Dimbleby's biography calls him the most formative mentor of Charles's adult life. The letter named no specific woman, but Mountbatten wasn't writing in the abstract. That same year, 1974, he began corresponding with Charles about a potential marriage to his own granddaughter, Lady Amanda Patricia Victoria Knatchbull, born June 26, 1957, 17 years old. Following his great-uncle's suggestion, Charles wrote to Amanda's mother, Patricia Brayborn, who also happened to be his godmother. Patricia replied approvingly. She counseled, however, that a courtship was premature. Her daughter had not yet celebrated her 17th birthday. This didn't stop Mountbatten. It barely registered as a setback. He had been playing the long game across far more treacherous terrain than this. He would wait. He would arrange occasions. He would maneuver. He had done this before. Dimbleby's biography records that Mountbatten had arranged the royal family's visit to Dartmouth Naval College in July 1939, carefully ensuring that Cadet Prince Philip was detailed to entertain the young princesses Elizabeth and Margaret while their parents toured the facility. That first meeting of Charles's future parents was, in the assessment of multiple biographers, the result of Mountbatten's deliberate stage management. Philip and Elizabeth met because Mountbatten put Philip in the room. He had engineered one royal marriage. There was no reason, from his perspective, why he couldn't engineer another. Mountbatten's target was his own granddaughter, Lady Amanda Knatchbull. His calculation about the match was strategically coherent. What he hadn't accounted for was that the same insider knowledge he'd selected for as a strength could function equally well as a reason to leave. To understand why Lord Mountbatten chose Amanda Knatchbull, you have to understand what she was. Not who she would become, though that matters, but what she represented the moment Mountbatten began his correspondence in 1974. Her lineage, through her mother Patricia, ran directly back to Mountbatten himself through blood, not marriage. Patricia was his elder daughter. Amanda was, therefore, not a Knatchbull who happened to have Mountbatten connections. She was a Mountbatten granddaughter who also carried the Knatchbull name and the Brayborn barony through her father's line. Through Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, her great-great-grandmother, she was a descendant of Queen Victoria. She was a second cousin of Prince Charles. The connection ran in every direction simultaneously. Her father, John Knatchbull, 7th Baron Brabourne, was one of the most well-connected men in British public life, an Oscar-nominated film producer from an ancient Kentish family whose documented possession of the Mersham Hatch estate dated to at least 1485. He wasn't a peripheral figure in the Windsor orbit. He was a peer in his own right, married to a woman who would later inherit her father's earldom as 2nd Countess Mountbatten of Burma. The family tree, if drawn on a single sheet of paper, would overlap with the Windsor tree so thoroughly that the lines between the two would become difficult to distinguish. The evidence of the Knatchbull family's genuine inner circle status is documented across events that stretch back decades and forward to within a few years of the period in question. When Patricia Knatchbull married Lord Brabourne at Romsey Abbey in October 1946, members of the royal family attended. When a Knatchbull grandson was christened in 1962, senior members of the royal family attended. Amanda's sister-in-law, Penny Knatchbull, wife of her eldest brother Norton, would eventually become so close to Prince Philip in his final years that Tatler described her as the only non-family member present at intensely private occasions during his last months at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. These weren't the connections of aristocracy on the margins of the Windsor world. This was the Windsor world, seen from the inside of the room, not through the window. Amanda herself, by the time the courtship reached its active phase, had the education and professional formation to match her background. The career she would eventually build, working as a nonprofit executive and non-executive director of several NGOs, wasn't the trajectory of someone who needed the crown to give her a sense of purpose. She was constructing a purpose of her own, quietly, outside the glare that the royal family had been generating around itself since she was a child. Lord Mountbatten saw an ideal candidate. From the purely dynastic point of view, bloodline, background, proximity, preparation, she was. She already knew the world Charles would inhabit. She couldn't be overawed by it. She had been watching it from the inside since she was an infant. The theory behind her selection was elegant, in the way that elegant theories often are before they encounter reality. An insider candidate, the logic ran, would weather the pressures of royal life better than an outsider. The shocks that destroyed less prepared women wouldn't destroy someone who had seen it all already. She would know the institution's rhythms, its demands, its unwritten rules. She wouldn't be surprised. She wouldn't crack. This was supposed to be the quality that made her perfect. It turned out to be the quality that made her dangerous. To the plan, not to herself. The courtship that Mountbatten built around Amanda and Charles lasted approximately 5 years, from 1974 to 1979. It was quiet by design. The two families were so deeply interwoven that Amanda's presence near the prince attracted almost no outside attention. A second cousin spending time with the heir to the throne required no explanation. Nobody needed to account for it. Mountbatten worked steadily to deepen the connection and find occasions that would accelerate it. His most ambitious plan was to accompany both himself and Amanda on Charles's forthcoming 1980 tour of India, an arrangement transparently designed to place them in sustained proximity at a moment when Charles might finally be ready to commit. India was meaningful territory. Mountbatten had served there as the last viceroy, overseeing independence in 1947. His name still carried enormous weight on the subcontinent, more than 30 years later. The plan was blocked from 2 directions simultaneously. Prince Philip objected on the grounds that Mountbatten's enormous personal prestige in India would completely eclipse Charles. The Prince of Wales, visiting a country that still associated Mountbatten with the independence transition, would spend his tour in his great-uncle's shadow. The visit would be Mountbatten's, not Charles's, regardless of the official itinerary. Amanda's father, Lord Brabourne, raised a more practical concern. A joint trip, The Prince of Wales and Mountbatten's granddaughter traveling together on a formal tour would rivet press attention on the two cousins before they had even decided to be a couple. The scrutiny would destroy the very outcome Mountbatten was hoping to create. Photographs of Charles and Amanda in India would constitute a proposal in the eyes of Fleet Street before either of them had a chance to decide for themselves. Both fathers objected. The India plan died. Charles would go alone. Mountbatten would find another occasion. Before any other occasion could be arranged, the courtship produced its own specific texture. Early in 1979, Amanda's younger brother Nicholas spent time at Sandringham as Charles's guest, a detail that conveys the easy, multi-generational quality of the family's relationship more vividly than any formal ceremony could. That same year, Charles brought Amanda aboard the royal yacht Britannia for a cruise to Eleuthera in the Caribbean. The heir to the British throne, the royal yacht, the turquoise waters of the Bahamas, and the granddaughter of Lord Mountbatten as the chosen companion. It was, in the context of Charles's social world, about as unambiguous an expression of sustained personal interest as he could have offered. The Britannia wasn't taken out for acquaintances. 5 years, multiple trips, a family infrastructure of support that connected every adult in the picture to every other adult. A grandfather who had staked his considerable matchmaking reputation on the outcome and was still actively engineering it into 1979. And, throughout all of it, a fact that sat at the heart of Charles's romantic life, visible to anyone who moved in his social world. Camilla Shand had married British Army officer Andrew Parker Bowles on July 4, 1973, at the Guards Chapel, Wellington Barracks, in London. The ceremony drew some 800 guests. Royal guests in attendance included Princess Anne, Princess Margaret, and the Queen Mother. Society pages called it the wedding of the year. She was 25, he was 33. They settled in Wiltshire, first at Bullhyde Manor in Allington, later at Middlewick House in Corsham. They had 2 children, Tom, born in 1974, and Laura, born in 1978. Camilla Parker Bowles was a married woman for the entire duration of the documented Charles-Amanda courtship. Her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles predates Mountbatten's first letter to Charles about Amanda by 7 months. Charles had first met Camilla Shand around 1971 through mutual friends in their overlapping social circle. They had become close. The relationship ended when Charles went overseas for naval service, and Camilla's engagement to Andrew Parker Bowles was announced in March 1973. By the following July, she was Mrs. Parker Bowles. Most serious royal biographers agree that Charles maintained an emotional attachment to Camilla after her 1973 marriage. The contours of exactly what form that attachment took in the mid to late 1970s are disputed. Different biographers place the resumption of a full affair at different points on the timeline, and the private calendar of Charles's emotional life during those years isn't available for inspection. What isn't disputed is that the attachment persisted. It was known within royal circles. It was part of the social reality of Charles's life during the years when Mountbatten was trying to secure him to Amanda. The most telling testimony on this question comes not from a tabloid reporter or a rival courtier, but from Amanda's own mother, Patricia Knatchbull, the woman who had replied approvingly to Charles's 1974 letter, the woman who was his godmother, the woman whose family had been positioned as the foundation of the entire dynastic plan. Acknowledged in 2005, looking back across 25 years, that Charles and Camilla had always been ideally suited, and that the impossibility had been one of circumstance rather than of feeling. That acknowledgement carries weight. It does not say the feeling stopped being relevant. It says that the impossibility was a function of the moment, not of the attachment. The attachment was apparently visible to the people around Charles throughout the years in question. Patricia Knatchbull, of all people, had the proximity to observe it. By August 1979, following Mountbatten's assassination, Charles was reportedly leaning heavily on Camilla for emotional support. A source close to the Parker Bowles circle later confirmed that by 1980, the two had fully rekindled their relationship as lovers. Charles himself, in his 1994 interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, his authorized biographer, on the record, stated that his relationship with Camilla had resumed after his marriage to Diana had irretrievably broken down. The framing implies a thread of connection that ran continuously through the years preceding that marriage, waiting for circumstances to permit its expression. There is no public record indicating that Camilla Parker Bowles was named in whatever exchange Amanda and Charles had in the autumn of 1979. The private conversations between them aren't in any archive. That boundary must be respected, and the script won't breach it. But Amanda Knatchbull wasn't a stranger arriving from outside the family circle. She was embedded across 2 decades in the world Charles inhabited. The social reality of that world, what was known in aristocratic drawing rooms, in the tight geography of families who saw each other at the same estates every summer, was available to her in a way that it wasn't available to a 19-year-old from a less connected family. What she made of that information belongs to her alone. On August 27, 1979, a provisional IRA bomb detonated on Lord Mountbatten's fishing boat, Shadow V, moored off the coast of Mullaghmore in County Sligo, Republic of Ireland. The explosion killed Lord Mountbatten at the age of 79. It killed Nicholas Knatchbull, Amanda's 14-year-old brother, and a 15-year-old local boat boy named Paul Maxwell. Doreen, the Dowager Lady Brabourne, died of her injuries the following day. Amanda's mother Patricia was on the boat. She survived, injured. Amanda's father and her twin brother Timothy, Nicholas's twin, were also injured. The family that Mountbatten had spent 5 years positioning as the foundation of a dynastic alliance was, in a single morning of August sun and sea, transformed into a family absorbing a violence so specific and so intimate that it is difficult to find a frame for it. They had been fishing. They do this every year. They were on a boat. Amanda wasn't on the boat that day. She had turned 21 that June. What she was, in the weeks and months that followed, was the daughter of an injured mother, the sister of a dead 14-year-old boy, and the granddaughter of a man who had been central not just to the matchmaking project, but to the entire architecture of her family's world. Mountbatten had been the originating force behind the idea that she should marry Charles. He had written the letter, arranged the correspondence with Patricia, encouraged the Caribbean cruise, designed the India tour plan that never happened, and maintained the pressure that kept the possibility alive for 5 years. He was the engine of the entire project. He was now dead, killed alongside his grandson, who was her brother. Charles's reaction to Mountbatten's death was described by those around him as one of the most profound griefs of his life. He had called Mountbatten his honorary grandfather. The Dimbleby biography describes his response as devastation. He had lost the person who understood him most, who had shaped his self-concept most deliberately, who had been most actively invested in the shape of his future. And in this state, both of them in grief, both of them processing a loss that had destroyed their connection at its source, Charles returned from overseas travel and, in the autumn of 1979, proposed marriage to Amanda Knatchbull. In the autumn of 1979, he proposed to her. As one biography records, without embellishment, but Amanda said no. Royal biographer Sarah Bradford states that Amanda refused him due to being unwilling to step onto the royal treadmill. That characterization is specific. It does not say she was too sad. It does not say the timing was wrong. It points to the royal treadmill itself, the permanent, public, institutional demand of life at the center of the Windsor family, as the reason. The thing she refused was the thing, not an incidental feature of the moment. Amanda has never spoken about this publicly. No memoir, no interview, no attributed remark exists in any archive anywhere. Whatever exchange took place between her and Charles, whatever was said in the room or in letters or across the specific occasion of the proposal, isn't available to us. What is available is the fact of her choice and the context in which she made it. She was 21 years old. She had just experienced the worst months of her life. The man who had been pushing her toward this marriage for 5 years had been murdered 6 weeks before the proposal arrived. Her family was in crisis. Her younger brother was buried. And yet, the available biographical record does not frame her refusal as a grief response, or as a postponement, or as a request for more time. It frames it as a no. A final, unqualified no. Amanda said no. A woman in pure grief might have asked for time. A woman who needed comfort and had found an unexpected anchor might have said yes. Amanda Knatchbull said no. The question of why sits at the center of this story, and the honest answer is that the documented record does not fully settle it. Biographers have pointed to grief and an aversion to royal life as the primary documented considerations. Both are real, both are intelligible. A young woman, still in the first months of the most acute grief of her life, receiving a proposal that would place her permanently at the global center of the most scrutinized family in the world. Declining on those grounds alone needs no further explanation. The grounds are sufficient. But there is a specificity problem with that explanation, and it deserves to be named directly. Amanda Knatchbull wasn't encountering the weight of royal life for the first time in autumn 1979. She had known it since birth. The royal treadmill, the scrutiny, the duty, the institutional machinery that demanded everything and acknowledged nothing private, wasn't a revelation to her. It was the world she had always inhabited, at a level of intimacy that most people born outside it never achieve. Members of the royal family had attended her mother's wedding. Her sister-in-law would later become one of Prince Philip's most intimate companions. The royal family for the Knatchbulls wasn't a distant institution glimpsed in newspapers. It was family. It was Sunday lunches and Sandringham visits, and the private rooms that the cameras never entered. When Sarah Bradford writes that Amanda was unwilling to step onto the royal treadmill, she isn't describing someone who was surprised by its weight. She is describing someone who had stood beside it long enough, 21 years of it, to understand exactly what stepping onto it would mean. That understanding isn't the same thing as grief. It's something more considered. The vetting process that Mountbatten had designed was supposed to work because Amanda already knew the world. The theory was that an insider candidate, unshockable by royal life, would be better equipped to navigate it than an outsider would be. What Mountbatten had not accounted for was that deep knowledge of an institution might produce a clear-eyed refusal of it, rather than a comfortable acceptance. He had selected for her insider knowledge as a strength. Her insider knowledge turned out to be the thing that let her see clearly enough to say no. The private conversations between Amanda and Charles aren't on any public record. No biographer has documented that Camilla Parker Bowles was specifically named in whatever exchange preceded the refusal. The full motivations remain private. Amanda's alone, held without public comment for more than 4 decades. What is documented is a chronology. Camilla was married throughout the entire 5-year Charles-Amanda courtship. Charles's emotional attachment to Camilla during this period is described by multiple biographers as continuous. Patricia Knatchbull herself, Amanda's own mother and Charles's godmother, acknowledged in 2005 that Charles and Camilla had always been ideally suited, that the impossibility was one of circumstance rather than of feeling. Amanda, a second cousin embedded in that inner circle with 2 decades of continuous proximity to the Windsor world, possessed the social context to read the landscape clearly, if she chose to look, and if what she saw shaped her assessment of what a yes would mean for the rest of her life. Whether Amanda's refusal was shaped by grief, by a professional woman's unwillingness to surrender her own emerging career, by the raw horror of what had just been done to her family, or by a clear-eyed assessment of the emotional landscape she would be entering as Charles's wife, she didn't share it then and hasn't shared it since. The most precise thing the evidence supports is that she made a considered decision, in full possession of more information about the Windsor institution than almost any other candidate Charles ever seriously pursued, and that the decision was no. That no required courage. She was 21 years old, in the aftermath of family catastrophe, being asked by the heir to the British throne, a man she had known her whole life, a second cousin, a man her grandfather had spent 5 years hoping she would marry, to say yes to the thing her grandfather had spent 5 years building toward. The social weight pressing on that decision, even with Mountbatten gone, was substantial. The family connections were real. The expectation, even if no one was currently articulating it, was written into the previous 5 years of her life. She said no anyway. After that no documented counter-effort materialized. No palace pressure, no second approach, no machinery deployed to change Amanda's mind. The relationship between the Knatchbull family and the Windsor family didn't rupture. If anything, it deepened in the years that followed, as though the refusal had been absorbed without disruption. Henny Knatchbull, Amanda's sister-in-law, became one of Prince Philip's most intimate companions in his later years, present at occasions from which even most family members were absent. Amanda's brother Norton and his wife remained in close contact with the royal household. The families stayed connected. Nothing broke. Mountbatten, the one person who would certainly have fought to change Amanda's mind, who had the force of personality and the relational leverage to make a second push, was dead. The engine of the entire project had been destroyed in August. What remained, in the autumn of 1979, was an heir to the throne who had proposed and been refused, and a family connection warm enough to survive the refusal without fracture. The palace didn't push back. The machinery moved on. This absence of reaction is worth a moment of attention. The most charitable explanation is that the refusal was accepted with genuine grace, understood as a decision made under circumstances of extreme grief, treated as final, and never weaponized against a family that remained deeply connected to the crown. The Knatchbulls had too much shared history with the Windsors to be treated as adversaries over a refused proposal. The warmth held. The machinery moved on because it had options. Charles had already met Diana Spencer. The timing requires care, because the narrative of a clean institutional pivot, Amanda refused, Palace panicked, Diana selected, isn't what happened. The events overlapped. Charles first encountered Diana Spencer in November 1977 at a shooting weekend near Althorpe, while visiting as the companion of Diana's older sister, Lady Sarah Spencer. Diana was 16 years old. Charles was 29 and was there to see her sister. He didn't, at the time, give Diana's younger sibling a second thought. By the summer of 1980, 8 months after Amanda's refusal, Charles had begun to consider Diana seriously. The reconnection happened at a friend's barbecue in July of that year, where, sitting on a bale of hay, Charles mentioned Mountbatten's death. Diana responded with the observation that she had noticed him at the funeral, that he had looked forlorn and in need of care. Dimbleby records what followed. Without any apparent surge in feeling, he began to think seriously of her as a potential bride. Without any apparent surge in feeling. That phrase is worth dwelling on. This wasn't a thunderstruck romantic revelation. It was a rational calculation arriving at a candidate who met certain criteria. The framing of the decision as analytical rather than emotional sits at the heart of everything that followed. Norton Knatchbull, Amanda's eldest brother, and his wife Penny were among the people who urged Charles to reconsider. They told him that Diana seemed too overawed by his position, that she didn't really know him, that the relationship had the quality of a young woman dazzled by a title rather than attached to a person. Charles was angry at their objections. He ignored them. Meanwhile, as Charles was debating whether to propose, his own doubts were visible to the people around him. During Ascot Week, he looked across a dinner table at Diana and asked the person seated next to him whether he thought it was possible to fall in love after you were married. He later approached a friend with tears in his eyes and said, "I am not sure that I can handle this." The friend pointed out that it wasn't too late to abandon the plan. Charles replied, "I am afraid it's..." He proposed in February 1981. Diana accepted immediately. She later said she had called her sisters from Buckingham Palace, and they had told her she couldn't back out. She was on the tea towels already. Charles and Diana married on July 29, 1981, at St. Paul's Cathedral, before 3,500 invited guests and an estimated 750 million television viewers worldwide. Diana later described the day, in secret audio tapes recorded in 1991, as the worst of her life. She had felt like a lamb to the slaughter. She had experienced intense loneliness, overwhelming anxiety, and doubts she couldn't express to anyone with the authority to act on them. Amanda, on that date in July 1981, was 23 years old and living her own life. To understand what the Amanda Knatchbull episode reveals about how the royal succession process worked in this period, it helps to examine it without sentiment. There was no formal palace institution devoted to vetting brides for Charles, no documented committee, no written criteria sheet. What existed was something more diffuse and arguably more consequential, a social network in which the same families circulated through the same roles, generation after generation, and in which personal advocacy by powerful individuals, men like Mountbatten, did the work that formal institutions did elsewhere. Mountbatten had not merely acted on a preference for Amanda, he had acted on a philosophy. His 1974 letter articulated it with uncomfortable clarity. The right wife was a particular kind of woman, chosen before competing attachments could form, before she had met anyone else she might fall for. Youth and inexperience weren't incidental features of the ideal candidate. They were the specification. The model required someone who could be the first serious attachment, rather than someone who arrived having already assessed the cost of what she was being asked to enter. That philosophy, applied with intention, produces a specific kind of result. It selects for women who are less equipped to ask certain questions before committing. It works best on women who haven't yet formed the context to evaluate the answers. Amanda Knatchbull had that context. She had accumulated it across 21 years of continuous proximity to the world Charles inhabited. The Knatchbull family's multi-generational embeddedness in the Windsor world represents a pattern that runs through multiple generations and multiple functions: bridesmaid, godmother, confidant, proposed wife. The repetition isn't coincidental. It's the natural product of a network that operates on inherited trust, where proximity perpetuates itself across generations because trust is slow to build and the requirement for it never changes. Amanda's role in the plan was the logical extension of a relationship the families had maintained since before her birth. From Mountbatten's perspective, she was the right person at the right moment. The problem, the fatal flaw, from the machinery's perspective, was that she was also a person, with her own assessment of what she was being asked to accept, and the family background to make that assessment clearly. The vetting process had designed itself to be immune to exactly this kind of refusal. It had selected an insider specifically because insiders were supposed to accept the institution rather than escape it. Amanda's insider knowledge was the feature that was meant to make the process work. It turned out to be the feature that let her see through it. Amanda Knatchbull married Charles Vincent Ellingworth on October 31, 1987. She was 30 years old. They have 3 sons. She has spent the decades since building a career in the voluntary sector with the same quiet, purposeful efficiency that seems to characterize everything she does outside the public eye. She worked as a nonprofit executive and non-executive director of several NGOs. The work is unglamorous and serious and useful, and it has been done almost entirely without public attention. She has never given an interview about Prince Charles. She has never spoken publicly about the proposal or the refusal. Not once, in the decades since, has an attributed remark from Amanda Knatchbull about her decision appeared in any publication, any archive, or any recorded conversation. The woman who understood the Windsor institution well enough to decline it has also understood, with perfect consistency, that nothing she could say about the refusal would improve her life. That silence is itself a choice, made and maintained across more than 4 decades. It takes a particular kind of discipline to say nothing that publicly, for that long, about something this many people are curious about. The safe conclusions the record supports are these. Lord Mountbatten pursued the Charles-Amanda match with documented persistence from 1974 until his death in August 1979. He wrote to Charles. Charles wrote to Amanda's mother, who replied approvingly. Mountbatten arranged opportunities and advocated actively, even designing an India tour that would have placed Amanda and Charles in prolonged proximity before both fathers blocked it. He died before the outcome he had worked toward was resolved. Amanda Knatchbull was the most dynastically qualified candidate Charles ever seriously pursued. Her lineage was impeccable. Her family's insider status was genuine and multi-generational. Her education and professional formation gave her the personal substance to match the background she had been born into. Camilla Parker Bowles was a married woman throughout the entire 5-year window of the Charles-Amanda courtship. Charles's emotional attachment to Camilla during this period is described by multiple biographers as continuous. Patricia Knatchbull herself, Amanda's own mother and Charles's godmother, acknowledged in 2005 that Charles and Camilla had always been ideally suited, that the impossibility was one of circumstance rather than of feeling. Charles proposed in autumn 1979. Amanda refused. No documented pressure was applied to reverse the decision. The family relationships survived intact, warm enough that Norton Knatchbull felt entitled to advise Charles against marrying Diana Spencer a year later. By February 1981, Charles was engaged to Diana Spencer. Diana was 19 years old, had no previous serious romantic history, had called Charles Sir until the day of their engagement, and entered the marriage in a state of doubt she couldn't articulate to anyone with authority to act on it. The contrast between the two women, what each knew, what each had been prepared to assess, what each was or wasn't equipped to refuse, is real, and the record supports it. Amanda Knatchbull had the full context. She had the family armor, the insider education, 2 decades of close-range observation of what the Windsor institution required from the women inside it. She made her evaluation. Her answer was no. Diana Spencer had the proximity, the aristocratic connection, and the family name. She didn't have the decade of education that Amanda had accumulated by being Mountbatten's granddaughter, Charles's second cousin, and the intended beneficiary of a 5-year dynastic campaign. She entered without the map. She found out what was inside after the doors were closed. Mountbatten's philosophy, laid out explicitly in his 1974 letter, had required a woman who had not yet formed competing attachments. A woman who had not yet been anywhere else. It worked best on inexperience, and it found its most compliant subject not in the insider who had spent her whole life watching the institution, but in the 19-year-old who had not understood quite what she was entering until it was already around her. Before his wedding, Charles had asked a dinner companion whether he thought it was possible to fall in love after you were married. He had approached a friend with tears in his eyes and said he wasn't sure he could handle it. His friend told him it wasn't too late. Charles replied that he was afraid it was. Amanda walked away before the doors locked. Diana didn't know there were chains until it was too late. The machinery that found Diana Spencer after Amanda Knatchbull's refusal had been designed, down to the philosophy articulated in Mountbatten's own letter, to select for exactly that. A woman who arrived before she could be warned and said yes before she fully understood what yes would cost. Amanda saw the chains before they were locked, and she walked. She built a different life. 3 sons, a husband of her own choosing, the productive decades of someone who made the right call once, under enormous pressure, at 21 years old, and never felt the need to explain it to anyone. If you want more stories like this, the women the official histories pass over, the decisions that changed everything and were never made public, subscribe. There are more where this came from.